So Zehra was born in India and grew up in Dubai. And after spending time in London, where she completed her master's in social psychology, and I read Befriended Many Foxes,
Yeah.
she moved to Ontario just in February 2020. When Zehra is not writing poetry or exploring local art, culture and music, or stargazing, she works as a social and corporate research associate. In her introspective collection of poems, Zehra explores her experiences of change as a migrant millennial trying to juggle her whim and mental health. Zehra's first published collection of poetry, A Place Like Mars, that you can see pictured up there, provides a peek into her experiences as a migrant millennial, navigating some changes, and her sense of identity while she moves across countries, people, and perspectives. Zehra's words invite us to explore the pains and strengths of letting go and maintaining a sense of self amidst new beginnings. And as we come out of COVID, it is in a way, a new beginning for all of us. So I think it's a beautiful way to not only come out of COVID and start those new beginnings, but also to celebrate Poetry Month with our featured poet. And Zehra is also going to be our guest judge for a poetry competition that we're doing for youth in grades 5 to 8. And that's in partnership with our local family transition place. And we're encouraging youth to write a 6-word poem about optimism. So again, something as a way to celebrate those new beginnings. And Zehra will help be judging all of those poems. All right, so I'll turn it over to you.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come here and attend this session with me. Like Shannon said, my name is Zehra, and I'd firstly like to thank Shannon and the team at Orangeville Library for setting this up. It's really lovely. And I'm hoping to just have an evening where we can share some thoughts, ideas, and I can tell you a little bit about my poetry, my inspirations behind it, and just my journey of how I got here from since I was born. So thank you once again for being here, and I'll leave some time for questions maybe at the end as well, so if you have any comments or questions, please go ahead and let me know. So to start, to tell you a little bit about myself, the first thing I would say is I describe myself as a millennial, which means that I really love coffee and I cannot afford a home in this lifetime. So, but before I begin to tell you a little more about myself, I just have this question for everyone here. That's usually posed. That's usually posed to us, you know. And if I just asked you where are you from, I don't know what would come to your mind, or what would you say? If I asked you where you're from, would you say you're from Canada? Would you say you're from Orangeville? Would you say, oh, you know, I'm from North America? And this has always been a really difficult question for me to answer, because I just have such a mixed background of being sort of a migrant across different countries, and this is a little bit about my story. So I was born in Hyderabad in India, and I was brought into Dubai when I was less than a year old. So I pretty much grew up in Dubai until I was about 20, and then I moved to London, England, where I did my master's degrees. And I was working there for a while, and then in 2020 I moved to Toronto, to Brampton, and it's been a journey of letting go of, you know, your friends and the places you grew up in, to now starting new beginnings. And although it's been really, really interesting, it's also come with its hardships, and that's a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. But the point is that, you know, we have people here who come from different places or identify in different ways from where they come from. But the point is that we are here, and we have this common thing between us. We're here in Canada, and we're able to now connect with each other and relate to each other on that. And I think that's something that's really interesting and beautiful in itself. So before I move on to talking about my journey into poetry or the way I use it as a medium of expression, I just wanted to show you a picture. And if you don't mind, what I'd want you to do is either jot down or think about 2 words that come to your mind when you see this. So I'll give you a moment to just look and think about it. Is anyone okay to share any of the words that have come to mind?
Vintage?
Okay, vintage.
Yeah, maybe by expression I was landed in a strange place and trying to
Okay,
understand.
so something like new, or maybe another one, yeah?
Industrial?
Industrial, okay. Wonderful. So I think the point of me showing you that and asking you that question is we all looked at the same picture, but obviously we described it using different words. And that description comes out of the difference we have had in our experiences. I also thought of industrial when I first looked at that picture. It's actually from this computer game called Machinarium that is from the Czech Republic, and it's really interesting. You should give it a go. But what I thought when I played that game or looked at it was it's very industrial, and it also has this childlike innocence about it. And I started to write a poem called Factory in my book, where I somehow managed to relate it to how my brain would work, like an assembly line. And that's kind of what inspired that poem. And I'm not going to be reading that out today, but my point is that poetry is just a medium of our experiences, of expression to express our experiences, and it's so novel and subjective in the way that it is, that it allows you to bring your experiences to other people in a way that they can interpret it in their own way and according to their own personal journeys. And I think that's why I relate most to poetry, because when you're telling a story or you're writing a full-length book, for example, I find it difficult to capture the moment of what I'm feeling or the current state of mind that I'm in. And that's why I think poetry as a medium of expression works really well for me and for a lot of people out there. So I'll talk a little bit about just my general influences in writing and authors that I like. And I think one of the most influential authors for me is J.D. Salinger and The Catcher in the Rye. I know it's quite a common book for teenagers to read in high school or university, but just the whole composition of that book and the way it's written, the characters, the cynicism, I think it's really defined my sense of humor today, and it's something that I can really relate to. So that's where I started liking that sort of direct style of writing. I also really like the work of Robert Frost, an American poet, and although he grew up in San Francisco, tended to write a lot about nature and the beauty of, natural beauty, which was really interesting for me because it's quite contrasting to his experiences. So he also uses a lot of symbolism, which I tend to also have in my writing, that I relate to. There's also Sylvia Plath that has a lot of writing on mental health that has influenced my work. You should also check out The Lazy Thoughts of a Lazy Woman by Grace Nichols. It's really witty and funny thoughts on being a woman in society today. So these are basically influences in my poetry writing since I was about a teenager. So the way I began to write this book is it was part of a challenge that I took last year in May. And it was to write 20 poems for 20 days. So a poem a day for 20 days. And I started to write the poetry. And maybe around when I reached day 7, I looked back at my poetry and I was like, am I going through an existential crisis? Because every poem had this sort of melancholy, it had this sort of wistful feeling about it, and I couldn't understand why that might be, even though the answer was really obvious, the fact that I just moved countries, and also we were going through the COVID pandemic. And it's funny because I never realized what I was feeling until I read it out in the poetry that I was producing myself. And that's another thing I'd like to say just about poetry in general. Sometimes it almost becomes like a dialogue between your brain and yourself. And it's a way to learn so much more about yourself that you may never have realized consciously. And what happened is I then basically wrote this collection of poems that overall had this theme of uncertainty. It had this theme of trying to find your way in new areas, trying to find your way in new terrains that you don't know how to navigate. And the other thing I thought was like, that sounds a lot like a new planet, because I personally like stargazing, and it just made it more understandable to me to explain it like a planet. And so I ended up naming it a place like Mars. So basically the theme of the book, or if you had to like bunch it up into under one word, it'd be dealing with uncertainty and trying to sort of maintain a sense of self while also growing and also, you know, trying to stay rooted to who you sort of are when you're put in a new situation with nothing that's familiar. And from now on, onward in our session, I'm just gonna go on to read some of my poetry and give you a little background around each of it. So when I started writing out my poems, so the first day, when I was like, okay, this is the first day of the challenge and I have to write a poem, obviously, I was met with writer's block. And I didn't know where to start. It's like I had forgotten English, it's like I had forgotten words. So what I did is I sat down and I just really thought about what is happening here. And I thought, okay, well, if I am experiencing a creative slump and writer's block, maybe I'll write about that. And so I wrote this poem called Words, and it's basically about how difficult the process of getting your feelings out into writing can be. And I'm just gonna go ahead and read it. And after every poem that I read, if you have any thoughts to share with me, please go ahead and do so. Words. Words. They flow, unrestricted, like a waterfall in a utopian valley. Now, the river runs dry. Words. They are clogged, constricted. Words entangled, a web, struggling in an uncanny valley. Words are swimming, staying afloat, gasping for air, but they've forgotten how to swim. Words engulfed into a muddled whirlpool. Words. They hit a jagged rock, smashed, fragmented. Words, now so complex, they're building bridges, laying the foundation, plank by plank. I don't know when my thoughts became words, for words are meant to form a sentence, and I can barely spell. So that's what came out of me just not knowing what to write. And I just wanted to point out that whenever any of us are undertaking any kind of art, we are going to go through that creative slump, and it's going to look a lot like the first scribble up there where you don't really know what's going on. And you're going to try and nurture it until you get to the point where it looks more linear or more clear to yourself as well, not just to other people. When I moved on with writing the rest of the poems, I also saw that some of it was coming out to be quite, talking about uncertain times and dealing with uncertainty, like I said. And I think that we can all relate to that because we have dealt with the pandemic of COVID-19, which was really, really hard for a lot of people. I mean, I'm privileged enough to have come out of it just missing out on going out to concerts and restaurants, but I know that a lot of people have lost their lives, their loved ones, and it's been tough for everybody. And some of the themes that I was catching in the poems I was writing is, it was a lot about waiting around for something that I didn't know what it was. And I feel like that's captured really well in another poem that I've written, which is called Waiting Room. And I'm gonna go ahead and read that as well. I feel like that one's a little more relatable to all of us, just because the COVID-19 pandemic is just a universal phenomenon. So, waiting room.
Louder, please. Thank you.
I see the blank wall, a wall I'm familiar with. I am in the waiting room once more. I've been here in the waiting room. I've been here before. But this time, I've entered through a different door. I know this atmosphere of doom and gloom, this time, weighing down on me. The air thick with apprehension as I'm sipping on anxiety. There is a solitary window high up on the wall. I could try to climb over, but what if I fall? In the waiting room, it's different today. I'm in a hurry, and I don't want to stay. In the waiting room, I glance at the chair next to me, empty. I remember a time when she would wait with me. Now there's no one in sight. I'm waiting on my own. No one in the vicinity. I'm stuck here alone. I am by myself, accompanied by the futile tick-tock of the broken clock. At the hour, the clock does chime, but again, I'm not sure. What is the time? I wonder when someone will come in and call my name, when somebody will tell me that it's the end of this game. In the waiting room, I wish I knew why I'm the only one. I wish someone would come in and tell me that my wait here is done. So I hope you all caught all of that. But in that poem, I feel like I was able to express just how isolated we all were feeling at the time, and just how I feel like I was able to capture the collective loneliness of what everyone was feeling at the time. And there's bits in the poem that talk about, I've been in the waiting room before, but this time I'm in a real hurry, because earlier I used to think a lot about living in the moment and not really planning too much for the future. But during COVID, or during the time that I moved here and it was all new, I was thinking maybe this time I don't want to do that. Maybe I just want to look and see what's there in the future. And so we have that poem. And one of the things that I thought that I would do right after the pandemic sort of eased up is there was this exhibition at the Royal Ontario Museum called Great Whales. And I really like whales. I think they are so fascinating because they're the largest mammals ever to have lived, and just, there are so many artistic renditions of a whale that have been so interesting to me. And I was just looking at that poster for the Great Whale exhibition one day, and I thought, oh my God, that whale looks amazing, so big. I wish I could just go and build a little house on it and just live there. And I know that sounds like a really bizarre thought, but I did get that, and I thought, okay, well, maybe that's something I can write a poem about. And it really made me think about how there's this sort of transmission of art almost, where I'm looking at a medium of art, which is a poster or a drawing that's made by somebody else in some other part of the world. I don't know who the author, or who the artist is. And then I've looked at that and I've had an idea. and then I've translated it into something else, and that's often what happens with, writers or other artists. And I think that sort of transmission of that artistic culture has also been so interesting, thinking from a writing perspective. And I can go ahead and read the poem about the whale, and maybe we can discuss what it sort of symbolizes, because there's a lot of symbolism in that one. So, whale. I built my home on the back of a whale. The whale, my island, the whale where I seek refuge. Its dense hum, music to my ears. It took me across the waters so deep, against all currents. I didn't drown. I held on to its skin. On its skin, stars and galaxies endless. I got lost. I found a map on its rich skin, on its fins, the scalloped edges pointing north. Time to rest, I thought. A future sailor, cradled to sleep. On this gibbous ship, the whale. The whale, with me afloat, grounded on its back. It took me to the other side. I built my home on the back of a whale. I built my home on the back of a whale. Well, in this one, I feel like I, at the time, was so out of my depth that I feel like I was trying to find something that was familiar or solid to maybe hold on to, so I could get through this whole wave of the pandemic and how difficult it was for everyone to deal with. And maybe we can take a little bit of a break now, and I don't know if anyone wants to share any thoughts with me or ask me any questions. If not, we can move on, but I thought I'll just keep a little bit of a pause here.
I think your poems are really relatable. And when you were talking about, those new beginnings and landing somewhere and trying to find yourself, I know personally I felt that like with motherhood, right? And when you're in this new place and you're in this new journey in your life, and how do you stay connected to yourself and your identity and try to keep those roots while you also discover this whole other new part of yourself as you enter this new phase of your life. And
yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy that you say they're relatable, because when I first read them, I was like, oh my God, this just sounds like, really, again, like a millennial just like whining about a lot of stuff that you shouldn't make so profound. But I guess with poetry, that's the thing. You could probably write a whole paragraph about a bagel you love, and someone will read it and relate to it. So I think that relatability thing in poetry is just so beautiful, I guess. I've talked a lot about sort of moving from different countries and having different experiences in each of those places, and then starting anew. And of course, there's a lot of hardships that everyone deals with when going through this. As we grow up and go through life, we lose loved ones to death. We lose touch with some really good friends. There's a lot that we lose while we're trying to chase other opportunities. And I think that's really what's unique to humans and our life, the fact that despite everything that goes on in everyone's life, I mean, I've met people with a lot of resilience and strength, and they just say, well, we just have to move on. And I think that ability, or that quality that humans have of being able to just carry on and with all the hardships and everything on your back, that's really unique and interesting. And I actually started to write this poem about a young man looking for the answer of what makes life magical. So it's basically a really long story-style poem. It is called The Magic You Seek, and it talks about a man trying to find, what's magical about life. And just to summarize it, he goes to an old man, and he goes to a young person, and he goes to several other people, and he tries to understand what's so magical for them. Some of them say, oh, it's just magical to live in this world where, the sun rises and the moon rises at night, and, it's just so natural and beautiful. And some of the people he meets say that it's quite magical to have colors and see a rainbow in different colors. Some say that it's the fact that we have family and friends and we're able to make those connections. And he talks to all these different kinds of people, and he then comes to the conclusion that, yes, all of this is really magical, but actually what makes life magical is the will to carry on and move on from the good things and the bad things. Because sometimes you have to let go of a lot of good things in life when you're trying to, grow, or when you're trying to start a new chapter. And I'm gonna read you a little bit of an excerpt from the poem, just because it's quite long and hard to keep up with if I read. But I'm gonna read the last 4 stanzas for you. There we go. So, The Magic You Seek. And he finally drew that life itself is magic, and it is in several ways truly and purely fantastic. Magic is in the sense of being, the sense of existence, the fact that you are real, laid with human persistence. It is what you look forward to, and it is what molds you. It is what encourages you to pass every day through. It is the feeling inside, the drive to carry on, and hold on to those things dearest, without which you cannot move on. So, as you can see, it's all about sort of picking out all the stuff that you really, really, really can't live without, and taking that with you to then move on to the next chapter in your life, or move on from a certain hardship. And these lessons that you've learned will always stay with you, but it'll just add to who you are as a person. The other thing that comes with sort of experiencing, or just growing up in general and, experiencing different segments of your life, is something that has a definition that doesn't really fully capture what it is. I feel like words in the English language don't really have, or there's no vocabulary to really capture what one feels when you feel this, but what I'm talking about is nostalgia. And this is something that's so differently experienced for different people, and sometimes it's a feeling, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. And I remember when I was about 13 or 14, I was scrolling, I think maybe, or I was looking at MySpace maybe at the time, and I saw this question, what's the color of nostalgia? And it honestly is one of the questions that I think about every day. I don't know why, it's just a really interesting question. And it would be really nice if all of us just took a minute to think about memories, or think about, what nostalgia is to us, and maybe tell me what you'd answer if I asked you, what's the color of nostalgia?
Blue.
Blue, okay.
For me, it's golden.
Golden, okay,
Yeah, like sandy.
okay.
I always think about Dubai.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting, and I'm gonna tell you what I think when I think of that question. But I'm gonna read out to you one of my favorite poems, or one that's really close to my heart in this book, and it's called The Color of Nostalgia. Totally inspired by this question that I saw as a teenager. And here we go. The color of nostalgia. Nostalgia walks in, uninvited, through the door, trying to convince me that things were better before. Nostalgia will linger, and its welcome overstay, until we're both very silent and there's nothing left to say. Sometimes I run into nostalgia outside. It will find me, no matter how much I try to hide. Sometimes it will appear as I cross a busy street, sometimes smelling like coffee, sometimes smelling sweet. Sometimes it can be loud like traffic and a police car, but if it gets lost, I know it can't have gone too far. Sometimes it will appear right before I get on the train, like buskers playing at the station, and for the rest of the day, it will remain. Sometimes nostalgia steps out of the shadow of an old mate and holds up an umbrella for me, even if it's raining until late. Sometimes nostalgia will prod for attention, but more often than not, I will oblige without question. Years from now, nostalgia will show up once more, perhaps through another door. It might be difficult to recognize with its new face, but it will take me back to this very moment, this very place. So that poem is really close to my heart because nostalgia in general is just such a bittersweet feeling for me personally. Obviously, it makes you feel really good, but at the same time, you have this like affection for the past, and you're not there anymore, so you're feeling a bit sad about it all. But at the same time, you realize that in the current moment, we're all making new memories that, 10 years from now, I'm gonna look back at this point in my life and go like, oh my God, that was great, or oh my God, I remember those days. And I think here as well, we all can relate to this collective nostalgia that we have of a world before COVID-19. I mean, it's been so long, it's kind of hard to imagine the time that, we didn't have to think twice before like hugging someone or hugging your best friend. And it's really interesting how we've adapted to it as well. But at the same time, I'm really happy we can be here and be doing this and we're coming out of it. So that's great. And thinking about this question, my answer would be lavender, or like a light purple. And it's because as like a teenager, that was my favorite color. And I remember coming home one day and my parents actually surprised me with painting my room lavender. And the room that I then stayed in and grew up in was lavender color. And that's why I think anything that plays out that I can associate with nostalgia tends to be just playing out in lavender with lavender filter. So I think this other poem that I'm going to read out is called Room, and it's just basically an ode to the room that I grew up in Dubai. And it's just, I'm not sure if any of you can relate, but it's always different to have that little room at your parents' before you try and go out and be really independent in the world. The room that sees all your, crying and rebellious phases and all of that. And it's kind of profound how we can take so much of a space and make it our own, and how much that space can then add to us as an individual. So I'm going to go ahead and read this poem. Room. I grew up within those four walls. They kept me content and warm. Those four plain walls, they kept me safe from the storm. Those four walls heard me rehearse for exams and for plays. They made it easier to pass through the days. They listened to me when I needed a cry. Those four strong walls, on them I would rely. I find myself living within four walls again, but these are different. I will try to explain. These white walls are silent and bleak. Those old walls to me would speak. So again, I guess symbolism, I've sort of personified my childhood room and written that. And I guess there's a reason we try to like have our own space in this world, whether it's like an office space or a room space. It's because we want to make that our own, and it's also such a medium of expression. And I lived in about 12 or 15 new houses after moving out from Dubai, and none of them have been the same or have the same charm or have the same energy, and I'm never the same person in any of those. So it's really nice to look back on a time where things were a little more constant, and I myself was a little more naive, I suppose, and constant as well. I guess I've spoken so much today about moving and starting new things and letting go, and I think that, no one knows that, and no one knows about starting from scratch more than my parents do, and more than a lot of immigrant parents do, because immigrant parents, they try to leave where they're from to look for a better life and better opportunities, and I've seen my parents go through a lot of hardships, sacrifices, a lot of experiences just to be able to keep us all together or give us a better life as children. And when I moved away from my parents, I obviously missed them, but I was also enjoying the independence. But at the same time, I thought, there's all these new experiences that I'm having that they're not going to necessarily be a part of, but that doesn't mean that I'm not who I am today because of a lot of what they have taught me or what they have given me. And I think this can be relatable to a lot of us here when I read it out, and it's just the last poem that I'm going to read out today, and the last poem in my book as well, and it's called A Tree Called Life. So I'm going to go ahead and read. A tree called life. A tree, this life, but a tangle of vines and branches and leaves, incoherent, where one begins and where one ends, but standing tall, surviving the fall. A tree, this life. A tree, this life, green on the outside, so full and so lush, inside, wearing away. The branches go gray, and brittle and weak, but surviving all the same. A tree, this life, changing form across seasons, but standing stationary, still, rooted, grounded, and still. A tree, this life, a tree in a forest of wildfires. A tree, this life, survives, breeds. A tree, this life, the tree survives. So I think a lot of symbolic meaning here, or what it means to me is, we can't really ever change where we come from, and there's always something that we will be rooted in, but what we can choose to do is sort of branch out in different ways. And like the tree, we're gonna have like bits of us that like get old and fall out, or there are bits of us that we do not take care of, so they will go dry. But at the end of the day, what we want to do is we want to blossom. And I think what makes us human at the end of the day is that sort of will to survive, but at the same time, our sense of self, sort of the essence of who we are, will stay the same. We'll just grow in different ways. We'll nurture different bits of ourselves. And in the end, what we're trying to do is just become really beautiful and pleasant for everyone to then be able to enjoy our company and offer that sort of beauty to everyone. So that one has a lot of symbolism in it. I also, that's a very different style as well for me, because I usually stick to like sentences, or I try to rhyme them at times, but this one was very free writing, sort of almost one word with where I've said the tree is grounded still. It's almost like trying to make that impact of how still and how grounded it is, while also trying to portray that it's branching out into new areas and new horizons. So that's the poem that I chose to end my book with, hopefully to remind everybody that, you know, wherever we've come from and wherever we are still the same person, but we do, you know, work on this blossoming, and I hope that can resonate with all of you as well. And that will also just conclude my talk for the day, and I'm really, really interested in hearing your thoughts and your ideas or your, you know, feedback. So thank you so much once again for listening and being a part of this session. It's been really special to me, and I'm really happy that we've had the opportunity to do this. Thank you so much.